So, this question comes from Northern Vermont, from a listener, and he says, Beth Ariel Montreal is a blessing to me, and I thank you very much. I wish I could start a Beth Ariel congregation here in Northern Vermont. So we have two questions. A particular individual had two questions about the upcoming feasts. The first part of the question, the specific word for trumpet is not in the Hebrew relating to Yom Teruah. I know that trumpets were the instruments that were used in making loud announcements, but discussion of the feast now always seems to focus on the trumpets. Why the exclusion of voices making acclamations? How and when did this shift occur? And the second question is, why is there a need for a Day of Atonement? Wasn't atonement accomplished at Passover?
By the way, this is a timely question as we are approaching the fall feast of Israel. The first feast, Yom Teruah, known as Rosh Hashanah as well, falls on the eve of Friday, the 18th of September, and continues into Saturday, which is when we will celebrate this feast during our Saturday service. Now, in answer to your question, you are right. In the scriptures, the word Teruah does not necessarily imply the trumpet sound. This word comes from the word ruach, which means to shout or raise a sound, and is most often translated by the verb to shout. This word is found in Leviticus 23, where you have the 7 feasts of the Lord, verse 24, where we see the commandment for this feast. It says, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month of the first day of the month you shall have a Shabbat rest, a memorial of blowing of trumpet, a holy convocation." The English translation of the word truach is blowing of trumpet, even though the word trumpet or shofar is not seen in the original Hebrew text. So how did this custom of blowing shofars or trumpet come about? In addition of the trumpet or shofar, blowing was added through tradition. You know, Rashi, a medieval rabbi commentator, explained concerning the blast of horns or shofar that these are traditions that were added, referring to this day as a memorial day, zikaron, to be done through shofarot, that is shofar. Another important rabbinic scholars, Nachmanides, agreed the addition of the shofar was added through the tradition. However, the association of the trumpet with the truach could be seen in a few passages in the Bible, such as Leviticus 25:9, where the means of truach is through the shofar. It reads, "You shall then sound the ram's horn abroad on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, you shall sound a horn all through your land." In another passage, as 2 Samuel 6:15, both words are distinguished from each other. The shouting, the truach, and the trumpet, the shofar, are both commanded to sound. However, by the 1st century, this word truach in Aramaic especially came to designate the blowing of the trumpet as we find it today. This is why they blow the shofar on this day. It's interesting to see that the choice of the shofar as being that from the ram, is according to this subject of redemption in the Torah, which brings us to the sacrifice of Isaac. Rashi actually explains, when you mention the ram's horn, God will remember on your behalf the binding of Isaac, who was replaced as a sacrifice by a ram caught in the thickets by its horn. This in Genesis 22:13. There lies a wonderful truth we'll look into very soon. Now, as for the second part of the question, Yom Kippur or the Day of Atonement, your question was, why is there a need for a Day of Atonement? What wasn't the Day of Atonement accomplished at Passover? It is true that the atonement was done by the Lamb on this one day of Passover. However, the 7 feasts of Israel should be seen as a prophetic, that is, demonstration of the workings of the whole plan of redemption. While the redemption is provided on Passover, it is only on Yom Kippur where we see the national salvation of Israel. In order to understand this point, we can look at the chart of the Feast of Israel. And this is good because we're getting into the fall feast very soon. The first half, as you can see, concerns the first coming of the Messiah, and the second part concerns the second coming of the Messiah. You can see in the chart the first 4 spring feast, Passover and unleavened bread. Both are called by the name of Passover, but they're two feasts. The Feast of First Fruits, which is that of the resurrection of the Messiah because he dies in Passover. The Feast of Pentecost, which is the birth of the body of the Messiah, which symbolically speaks of us, the believers, if we believe that Yeshua is our personal Savior. We then have a lapse of 4 months, okay, the time of 4 months. This is the time of harvest, which symbolizes the work of the body of the Messiah today. These 4 months are mentioned by Yeshua himself when he was in foreign territory, that is in Samaritan territory, and when he told the disciples in John 4:35, you have it on the screen, do you not say, there are still 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields. They are already white for harvest. It's for today. This passage is for today. So these 4 months then brings us to the 7th month, which contains the fall feast, the last series, right? So here we have the Feast of Trumpet, right, as the first of the last feast, right? Which in turn is the day of the resurrection of the believers, or the rapture, if you want. A great teaching of the Bible. This is when the believers go home. Then we have the Feast of Yom Kippur. This is the time when man is left to what he always desired, left to himself. This is when we see the final wars that the nations are preparing for today. This festival ends with the second coming of Yeshua, leading to a recognition of his person by the remnant of Israel. And then the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, which symbolizes the millennium or the messianic times. This is a very brief rendering of the 7 feasts of the Lord that we find in Leviticus 23. However, it is necessary to see the difference between Passover and Yom Kippur. While at Passover redemption is effected, it is only at the end of Yom Kippur that its full effect is accepted and appropriated by the remnant again of Israel and of the nation. So Passover is redemption individually affected. Yom Kippur is redemption nationally accepted. While the atonement was done at Passover, prophetically it is only in the day of Yom Kippur that this atonement is accepted by the remnant of Israel. So this actually is a very good question.